welcome. Hi, everybody. I'm Jay Bernhardt. I'm Dean of the Moody College of Communication here at the University of Texas at Austin. It's my great honor and pleasure to welcome you all today to the 2018 McGarr Symposium. We're delighted you could join us for what's going to be an insightful and interesting conversation with the chairperson, the chairman of the New York Times Corporation, Arthur Sulzberger Jr. And brave and open dialogue about the media and its effect on culture and society is synonymous with the purpose of the McGarr Symposium on Sports and Media. The symposium is part of our college's new Center for Sports Communication and Media, led by Dr. Michael Butterworth. And as you will hear, today's topic is really not essentially about sports per se, but about the second half of the title, and that is the state of media in today's society. To help welcome you, I'm really pleased to introduce the new incoming director of the School of Journalism here at UT Austin, Dr. Kathleen McElroy. Who I'm delighted to say will share a few words with us before we start our program. So please, Kathleen.
Hi, everybody. I'm lucky to have worked with Arthur Sulzberger Jr. And I say with, and it kind of sounds like weird because he's the publisher. And I was an editor at the Times for 20 years. But I got to know him, even though I wasn't nearly at that level. And that shows you something about the humanity and the human nature of Arthur. We were together through some wonderful times, and we were together through some not so wonderful times. In fact, I worked with him closely during the whole Jason Blair scandal. And I will tell you that the thing about Arthur is he is humane. He is a real human being. He cares about people. He cares about everyone, whether you were working in the press room or whether you were a top-notch Washington reporter. And that is something I don't know you can say about every publisher. He's a man, yes, the Times is his family business, but it's also his family. And so with those words, I think we should all just greet Cappy McGarr and Arthur Sulzberger Jr.
Thank you. As we're getting started, please have a seat. I just would like to share a few words about Cappy McGarr, but to kick off our program. Cappy is one of the best and proudest alums of the University of Texas at Austin, of the Moody College of Communication and our School of Journalism. And the McGarr Symposium was created in 2006 with generous support from the McGarr family and has become synonymous with bold and open dialogue, as we shared about media and communication. For example, in the past, in conjunction with the Civil Rights Symposium hosted by the LBJ Library and Museum, the McGarr Symposium previously presented Hall of Famers Bill Russell and Jim Brown in conversation with Dr. Harry Edwards about activism for social change in the world. The symposium has also addressed other topics such as sports and human rights in the third world, fan behavior and violence, disparities in school-based programs, and throughout all of these discussions, the critical role that the media play in shining a piercing light on the truth. Cappy is a true friend, of course, to the college and to UT Austin, and as I shared at our event on Sunday, I can honestly say that I know of no alumnus of this college who is more Moody than Cappy McGarr. And I do truly mean that in the kindest possible way. So please, I give you Cappy McGarr and Arthur Sulzberger Jr.
Thank you, Dean. Good afternoon. I'm here today to honor and to welcome Arthur Sulzberger Jr. to the Moody College of Communication, the chair of the New York Times Company. For a quarter century, Arthur served as publisher of the New York Times. During his term, which ended last December, the Times won 60 Pulitzer Prizes. Arthur was the fifth member of his family to oversee America's paper of record, and he brought his own vision to the enterprise. In 1996, before Google, YouTube, or Twitter, Arthur launched nytimes.com. In 2011, he set up a paywall, a risky decision that has since proved vital to the company's growth. Today, more than 70% of the Times' paid subscribers read exclusively online. I invited Arthur here today to reflect on the New York Times' remarkable history and its future, especially during this fraught and fast-changing time for American media. At a time when so many Americans talk straight past each other, this symposium is meant to honor our university's talent for starting conversations that educate, inform, and ultimately lead to change. I cannot think of a finer example than the one set by our guest today. Without further ado, it's my honor to welcome Arthur Sulzberger Jr. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Walter Robb, who introduced me to Arthur. Walter is the former CEO of co-CEO of Whole Foods, and he also, I'd like to do a shout out to Gabby Sulzberger, who was the chairwoman of Whole Foods board for a long time. She graduated from Harvard, which we affectionately call UT of the North. So Arthur, you started in the Times as a Washington correspondent.
Right.
And you worked on the Metro desk for eventually crossing over into the business side of the operation. Anything transferable between those two roles?
Oh, wow. Okay, well, first off, let me say thank you so much for having me here. It's quite an honor and a delight, and I hope we make this an entertaining conversation for all of you. I was a reporter for about a decade. 4 years before I joined the Times,
right.
2 different organizations, and then a number of years at the New York Times. And when I was told pretty definitively that I was going to be moved to the business side of the operation as part of my training, I thought to myself, okay, I will move to advertising as I was told I was going to do, and I will hate it. And I'll give it a year, and then I'm going to say, sorry, I'm going back to the newsroom. I know that means that I may not be on the career path, but I love journalism so much. And to my utter amazement, I loved it. And I remember the first moment I had when I made my first ad sales. It was I was given the finance category of all crazy things. As my wife Gabby knows, the finance is what I know least. But I made my first ad sales, and I suddenly realized, wow, that was $60,000. By the way, that's cheap. This is in the 80s, early 80s. I said, I think I just covered the expenses of one of our famous journalists who drank a lot. I think I just covered his alcohol expense for a year. You know, and that really was the sort of the moment I went ka-ching. That at the end of the day, selling ads was about supporting our journalism.
Yeah.
And that really was the trigger moment for me. Because at the core of the New York Times, the core value is the quality of our report. And if that is the one thing we have to maintain as we go through all of these digital transitions that we've gone through, and more to come, because this is relentless.
You know, Arthur, your grandfather and your father, you grew up around them, and did they give you any advice in terms of when you became publisher that?
My grandfather actually was not around at that time anymore. But my father, sure, yeah. I was assistant publisher for a year. I was deputy publisher for a year or
right.
2, and then I was publisher. But so basically, I was on a learning curve, and yeah.
But what advice did he give you in terms of when you first started out in the paper? You had to make a decision. Do I need to go work for the New York Times or not go work for the New York Times? Obviously, they
back in the, but you mean back
yeah,
in
back,
that early time?
Back in the early times.
Okay, so here's my advice to all of you who are actually thinking of having good, exciting careers in journalism.
Have your family on the paper?
Which I call it womb with a view. No, that was not what, but I like it. I spent 2 years as a reporter in Raleigh, North Carolina, and a now defunct afternoon daily called the Raleigh Times. It is the best bar in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you ever go to Raleigh, go to the Raleigh Times bar. And then I went to the Associated Press, and I was a foreign correspondent for the AP in London for 2 years. But going back to Raleigh, the joy of going to a small paper like that and learning the skills you need and making the mistakes that you will inevitably make is that you'll never find them. They'll never be found. No one is ever going to find the mistakes I made in Raleigh, North Carolina, trust me. And so you really learn the business at a chance to really grow yourself without being as public as you would be if you went directly to the New York Times. So,
yeah, you know, succession is extremely hard in any business, and it's really unheard of for sixth-generation family business. We know AG has a
He's actually, AG is the 5th gen.
He is the 5th gen?
Yeah, right,
okay.
because my father and my uncle were the same gen. So my uncle died after only being publisher for 3 years.
Okay.
So.
Is he going to be the last Sulzberger being publisher?
You always go to the dark side, don't you? And the answer is no. And the reason that I say that with such certainty is one, because the family is stunningly united. So, sorry, this gets a little boring. So when my father took the New York Times and made it a public company, he created 2 classes of stock, the A shares and the B shares. The A shares are publicly traded. Please feel free, buy A shares, support our journalism and invest. It's good right now. Gabby can fill you in. Mark, we've done pretty well recently. The B shares are the ones that are in a family trust. And that's where the control of the company is.
Right.
And the family is really stunningly united around staying united. And we have regular family meetings, we have trustees, we have a family board, we have an education committee, we have a lot. So when we made the transition to the 5th generation, which is very rare, 5 Gs in a company, we put a real process in place. We explained to the family this was the process that was going to be used to figure out who my successor was going to be. We brought it down to a group of 3 incredibly talented finalists. This is all public information. And I recused myself from the group making the decision because my son was one of the people.
3, yeah.
And so I stepped back and I said, no, this committee that we put together made up of 2 members of our board of directors, 2 members of the family, and 3 members of the management team. They made the decision. So that's why this has gone so well. And I think if we're just open and honest and really have a process in place, we're going to move to the next generation.
I mean, AG started as a reporter and has worked his way through it, just like his name, from the womb. But I mean, he really, earned his stripes.
Oh yeah.
And he's 38 years old or 37?
Yes. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Soon to 30.
I want to talk about some of the big moments as your time as publisher. I'd like to start on September 11th, 2001. It really kind of changed America, and it changed, I think, the way people looked at America and and terrorism and our safety. And how did that, as publisher, how did that change the New York Times view of reporting, and how did that change your job as publisher, if it did?
Actually, in a way, it reinforced so much of what was core, that we had to have boots on the ground. We had to get people to the sites. And this site was not just obviously Lower Manhattan, as horrifying as that was, but having people who were embedded in other places like Afghanistan and Iraq and et cetera. But it was a very, very brutal time. But I'd love to tell just one story
Sure.
about how committed the journalists at the New York Times are. So the second plane hits. It's clear it wasn't just an accident now. The city goes into terrorist mode, shuts down the bridges, shuts down the tunnels, just shuts down getting in or out of Manhattan. And one of our news clerks, a young man, was so committed that he got a paddle boat and he crossed the Hudson
Wow.
from Jersey to Manhattan just so he could be there to support the enterprise. And I got to tell you, that was just one example.
Heroic.
But he was. Howell Raines was our editor at the time. He was unbelievably committed to us just having the story. And we won more Pulitzer Prizes in that year than ever any news organization has ever won in history. I don't want to make this about winning a prize. It's not. It's about really having the depth and the commitment and the people who could really help us understand what was going on. Which isn't to say we didn't make mistakes. We did. But we were there and we owned our mistakes.
In the mid-2000s, the Times broke a major story about NSA domestic surveillance operation. Reporter Jim Risen had been tipped off about a program, but the Times delayed publishing that story for 13 months. In an interview with Frontline, Risen described a White House meeting where he attended with you and the Washington bureau chief. In Risen's words, and I quote, President Bush was saying, in effect, you, Arthur Sulzberger, will have blood on your hands if there's another attack that could have been prevented by this program. What ultimately swayed you to print the story? Because it turned out that the story was absolutely correct and very valuable in terms of you printing that story in the New York Times.
Yes, and not nearly as dangerous as they had suggested. So it was an interesting moment. Someone once said that I have a famously awkward sense of humor, and one example that I think they gave is when I walked into the White House, and there was the president. We were in the Oval Office briefly because we met outside, and I said to President Bush, "Isn't it fascinating? We both work in the offices our fathers once had." I thought it was a good line.
That's a good line.
But at the end of the day, and it was our Washington bureau chief, Phil Talman, it was our executive editor as well, Bill Keller and me. We met, we heard them out. I mean, that was our focus. Our focus was, all right, let's make sure they understand we are listening to their concerns and we're trying to understand what it is that we really have at risk. And we're not there to defend our decision because we're going to hear them out first. And then, based on what happens subsequently, we'll make a decision. We listened to them for 284 years, or so it seemed. And at the end, I made a request. And I said, okay, you've said that a number of, there's a small group of senators who are aware of the issues you've all raised that are also very concerned that if we publish this, we're going to put the nation at risk. I said, I'm going to need your permission to speak to them because they won't speak to me unless I get your permission. Can you give them permission to speak to me? And they met for a second and they said, sure, we'll do that. And Bill and I walked out after the meeting and we huddled for a few minutes, and I said, okay, let's give them 2 days to get back to us having given permission, and then let's meet with those senators and make sure that what they're telling us is accurate. We never heard another word from them.
Well, is there any time in your term as publisher that a White House tried to call you to change a story?
To change a story?
Or to not publish a story?
Yeah, no, I think not publishing is a bigger one.
Not publishing.
Yeah, that's the biggest. No, I mean, there have been times we've worked with the government very, very tightly. I mean, if I can be so bold as to talk about the Unabomber.
Sure.
Are all of you, any of you familiar with the Unabomber? Okay, a few are. So the Unabomber was this person who was sending bombs out and just doing horrifying things. No one could figure out who he was. And then one day, out of the blue, he sends a letter to the New York Times saying, if you publish this letter, and it was a letter he'd written explaining why he was just doing these horrors, I will never bomb anyone again. And it turns out he had sent the exact same letter to the Washington Post. The then publisher, owner of the Washington Post, Don Graham, and I are very dear friends, very close friends. And Don and I got on the phone, and we agreed immediately. We were going to work through this with our own organizations, but we were going to find ourselves in the same place. And after meeting with government officials to make sure that what we did was good, we agreed to run the letter in the Washington Post, not in the New York Times. Why? Because the New York Times is a national newspaper, and therefore we are distributed throughout the country, and it's very easy to get a copy, as I hope you've all discovered. The Washington Post is not a national newspaper, and while it does have places around the country you can buy it, they're much more limited, and the FBI said if we publish in the Washington Post, we can literally watch every single place, and we can capture him. And in fact, he was caught because of this. Not via that, believe it or not, what happened is his brother read the letter and said, "Oh my God, my brother is the Unabomber." And that's how they caught the Unabomber.
Wow.
But that was a moment where we worked with the government very closely for the public safety.
I want to fast forward to another recent bombshell. Last October, when Jody Cantor and Megan Toohey were first reported the allegations against Harvey Weinstein. Have you ever seen a news story that broke the dam the way this one did so quickly?
It's remarkable. No. I mean, what has happened and the movement that has set off is just remarkable and powerful. And so, no. And it wasn't just as we know, Harvey was the beginning, but we've
You know,
done
in
a
an
lot more
interview in
since
Slate, I know you know this, but I want to tell the audience, but Jody Cantor described seeing the publisher, Arthur Sulzberger, in the cafeteria and knowing he was protecting us and knowing the institution was standing by us meant so much to us. And I think that speaks to your unbelievable people that work for the Times, respect you.
Yeah, well, that's very nice. And also, if I may be so bold as to note, Harvey was a major advertiser. But our journalism comes first, always, always. And so there have been times when I've had meetings with CEOs in which they say, if you continue to write those kinds of stories about us, I'm not going to get into who, we're going to pull our advertising. And
who?
I'm not going to get. But I mean companies now, not individuals. Nothing like Harvey, nothing like that at all. But they felt that maybe we were against what that company was doing or what the industry was doing, and advertisers get that, and even nations. When we were about to print a major story about China and about the families of great wealth and how the money was flowing into these families in so many disparate ways, and we had a reporter who had worked on this story for, I'm going to say, about 2 years, piecing all these things together and saying, wait, how come she has so much money? Wait, she is the daughter-in-law of the uncle of the wealthy guy over here. And he pieced these all together, and he went at the end, he went to the Chinese government, as we always would do, and said, okay, this is what we're pieced together. Here is, we need some comments from the government about this happening. And the ambassador came to my office, met with me and our then executive editor, Jill Abramson, and said, if you print this story, you will never have the right to publish, or we will block you in China. Of course, we published the story. He won the Pulitzer Prize, and we have been blocked in China ever since. But that's, again, back to the core. The mission of the Times is to sustain quality journalism.
When you get in a situation like that, do you reach out again to the government officials in China and say,
yeah.
I mean, is that an ongoing conversation?
No, it comes and goes. Honestly, it's sometimes
they've got a lot more
with
people that would read the Times than here.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and we still have the Chinese language website up, so it's still up, and there are a lot of people who have figured ways of going around the Great Firewall to get to the Times, but it is not easy, and it gets harder and harder.
Right.
But at some point, you say, okay, that's the way it is.
To change the subject, President Donald Trump. The New York Times stock, since he's been elected president, is up over 100%.
See, I didn't
did-
need Gabby, my wife, to answer
The
that question.
digital subscriptions from quarter 16 to quarter 17 is up almost 50%, 46, 47%. The paper's total revenues have increased 8% to $1.7 billion. How is the New York Times failing?
Well, look, let me start about this conversation about the Times' success during this last year and change. We were on the path of that success before this president was elected. But even so, there's no question that, like many in the media space, we all felt the Trump bump. That's what it's called. You know, things went up like that. As I have said to many others, you know, World War II was good for circulation. Was it worth it? But more seriously, the truth of the matter is that when Donald Trump came to meet with my colleagues, the journalists at the New York Times, in that period between he was elected but before he was inaugurated, he walked into the boardroom where we had our editors and reporters sitting, and he said, he came in and he said, "The New York Times is a jewel. It's a world jewel." So I'm going to say that he really believes that.
Well,
but look, the coverage has been intense. We have a president who likes to make breaking news easy with his tweets. And I'm not going to defend it or not defend it. That's what he is doing. And our job is to cover it, and to cover it honestly. And
but he
we are
sounds
doing
like,
that.
I mean, he's kind of like your psycho ex-boyfriend or girlfriend. He's obsessed. I mean, he craves approval, yet he trashes you every day.
Yeah, I know. He also gives our reporters some unbelievable access to him. Yeah, I know. Look, it is what it is. And we just
What
have
is it, I mean, how do you respond to a president that's so openly hostile, though, to the New York Times? I mean, I know you said that, you know, you want to make sure that you print the right, you know, the facts the way they are.
Well,
But I mean, it's got to be,
so I'll
he
tell a
tweets-
story, and maybe this will help. Put it in context. Under the agreement I had with President-elect Trump to meet, he and I met one-on-one for about 15 minutes first. And just, you know, he was unhappy with the way our reporters have been covering him during the campaign, and he made that clear, which is fine. And then I said, okay, Mr. Trump, it's time for us to walk into the boardroom where my colleagues are waiting for our conversation with you. I said, when you walk into the boardroom, you're going to see photos, signed photos of many, many famous people. We have signed photos of every president since Teddy Roosevelt, and I look forward to having yours, I said. And but I want to draw your attention to one in particular, not because of the photo, but because of what he wrote. And it reads, "To the New York Times, some read it and like it. Some read it and don't like it. But everybody reads it." Richard M. Nixon. I said, that's the last president who took on a free press. Think how it ended for him.
Wow. Wow.
It went right over his head. So but the truth is, look, this is a time when the press is under a tremendous assault. Let's get serious for a moment. This is a time when we have to be committed, not just the New York Times, but journalism, journalists, to covering stories in an open, honest way. And we are doing just that. And we need to make sure we support those journalists and that they recognize that they have the authority to cover these things as hard as it can be, and that we've got their backs. And I don't mean just me, but also the readership, people who subscribe, and by subscribing, help support the mission. And that's critical to a democracy.
The news is fit to print.
Well, not just the news is fit to print at the New York Times, but I worry very much about, honestly, I worry very much about local journalism. I worry about the Austin papers, the Dallas papers, the St. Louis, I mean, I could keep going. Because they don't have quite yet the business model that is going to sustain them in quite the way we are sustained at the Times. We have 1,450 journalists at the New York Times. That's including news and editorial, news and opinion. We have them across the globe. We have more foreign correspondents than ever in our history. We have more national correspondents than ever in our history. And that's because, thank God, we have made the transition from the ad-supported model. When I started at the New York Times, I'm going to say advertising made up 85% of our revenue, maybe a little higher, to the subscription model, which you've already noted makes up 60 and change percent of our
almost
revenue.
70.
Yep. So it's been a big, painful period. We've gone through some very tough times, as you know, to get there.
Right.
But we're able to do that because we have that international.
Arthur, what is the answer for these regional newspapers and for these small town newspapers? What is the answer for them to not only continue to be profitable, but how do they stay alive?
Well, I wish I could say there was a clear answer, and I really do wish I had that. And we have some people here in this room who know what those pressures are like more than I do. But moving to the digital pay model has been a true blessing. It's been painful, but it has succeeded. We now are at circulation levels that are unprecedented by far in our history.
Right.
What is it, about 3.6 million paid subscribers? So 2.6, I believe, roughly are digital only, and then 1 million more are print. And as you know, if you get print, you also get digital wrapped in. And that doesn't include student subscriptions, by the way, and I hope many of you students have that here. But that's the challenge. The challenge is going to be having the resources to prove that you are so critical to the community that the community will find ways to support you. And sometimes those ways will be financial, people saying, yes, I'm going to buy the paper, or I'm going to subscribe online. Sometimes there's the other model of not-for-profit, right? Texas Tribune, right?
Right.
So there's going to be a balance over time, I think, between the profit model and the not-for-profit model that are going to have to sustain these enterprises. Because remember, democracy starts in your hometown. And if you don't know who to vote for mayor, or you don't know who to vote for your congressman, that's going to be a damaging, long-term damaging path.
Exactly. The Times, obviously, and you've alluded to it, is kind of the definitive source of news in this country. Between the sordid details about porn stars and Donald Trump wandering around the White House in his bathrobe, do you worry that reality is pushing the Times into a tabloid-esque territory, or is that, I mean, okay.
No, I don't. Look, we could have said that honestly about President Clinton.
Right.
We could have said, oh, look, it's all tabloid-esque. You know, he had sex with her in the Oval Office. But no, you can rise above that. You've got to cover the story.
Because he's President of the United States.
But you don't have to be, obsequious or obscene. And
right.
And so no, there's a way of covering this that's adult.
You've known Donald Trump, I'm assuming, a long time since he's been in New York.
Not really.
Really? You never?
Yeah. I never traveled in those circles, honestly. I met him once or twice, but never knew him.
We've talked about the state of the media, but Mark Thompson, the CEO of the Times, recently said that print has another 10 years. Will the Times ever become a digital-only publication?
So Mark Thompson is our CEO, as was just mentioned. He's actually a very interesting case, if I may go back for a second. Mark Thompson is the former head of the BBC. He's a Brit. And he is the first external CEO since 1896.
Wow.
That was the last time someone from the outside came in to become CEO. and that guy was my great-grandfather, and he bought the place. But Mark has been a journalist. He ran the BBC. He has a global vision.
Right.
So it's so good to have that kind of person in the leadership position. So he said yes. He said 10 years. I want to acknowledge that I made that same claim. I think I was giving an interview at Davos, the event that happens.
Right.
And I said, and the question was, how long will print be around? And I said, I think probably 5 to 7 years.
When was that?
That was 12 years ago.
I'm a good straight man.
Exactly. And in truth, what we've seen, look, we are seeing print decline, but we're seeing print decline at a much slower rate than we had ever expected. That's true. Now, you know, let's agree there's more devices out there than ever before, and there's going to be devices that may cause that to happen faster. I used to say many years ago, it's not important how people get our journalism. Whether they read it, whether they hear it, whether it's beamed directly into their brain. The point is, it's the journalism that's critical. So hopefully print will be around a while. It's still highly profitable.
Right.
But if it doesn't, what's important is that people still come to us however they come to us.
What was the vision for the op-ed page when he brought in James Bennett to run it in 2016, and how do you think it's going?
James Bennett was a former journalist for the New York Times who then went on, left the paper, and had a great career elsewhere. But I brought him back to become the new editorial page editor. So it's op-ed and editorial. Both report to him. For those of you who are familiar with print, that's the last 2 pages of the A-book. And for the Sunday paper, it's the review that reports to him. What we wanted was sort of a revitalization a little bit. Right. Andy Rosenthal had been a fabulous editorial page editor, but he'd been there for a long time, and he was, looking at retiring. So we wanted someone who brought in a broader vision of in particular, digital, because it's digital. We're looking at that for hiring, whether it's a reporter, whether it's an editor, whether it's an ad salesman. It's all digital. And we wanted to have more voices, not just Tom Friedman, is who I love, or Nick Kristof, or Gail Collins. And so bringing in the kinds of people like Bret Stevens, who we brought in. Bret Stevens, famous columnist from the Wall Street Journal, somewhat a little more conservative than our traditional columnists.
Well,
but to begin to bring that, broaden the voices so people can come to the Times who don't always have to agree with it.
I want to ask you about the Bret Stevens. You sent a personal letter appealing to readers.
Oh. I'm sorry. Oh.
You get a double mic?
Yeah, in other words, this is the NSA and the Chinese, both listening in.
So speaking of Bret Stevens.
Yes.
Thank you. You sent a personal letter appealing to your readers who were canceling their subscription in protest. How do you respond to criticism that Bennett has come under, quote, elevating white male conservative voices under the skies of diversity of thought? I mean, I, quite frankly, I love reading Bret Stevens. I mean, he's a very thoughtful voice, and one that is different from Nicholas Kristof and some of the other ones that I truly, really do like. Paul Krugman.
And we need more diversity than we have. So we need not just diversity of thought, we need greater diversity. So we also just brought a woman columnist on. Okay. We're looking for others. And so there's more to come on that front.
So should anybody in the crowd apply?
You can feel free to apply. Don't expect it. We need people who have been doing this for a number of years before they come to the Times.
I understand. So it's a golden age, again, of investigative journalism.
Oh, my gosh.
How do you feel that 30 to 35% of the people who read the Times don't believe it? Richard Nixon had written that. Some don't agree with it. You don't have to agree with it, but some people truly do not believe what they read in the New York Times.
This is a reflection of the time we are in. Is truly my belief. We are at a time where this country is very divided, And we've been in these times before. Some of us may remember the era of the Vietnam War.
Right.
Some of us may even remember vaguely what it was like in the early 50s when you had the McCarthy hearings and the real attack on, quote, communists, even though that meant they were merely liberal in most cases. There's a wonderful book that I highly recommend to all of you called The Cycles of American History. It's written by Arthur Schlesinger Jr., no relation, not Sulzberger. And it really talks about how this country has a history of coming apart, coming back together, splitting apart, coming back together, splitting apart, sometimes painfully, the Civil War, but most often not like that. And I think we're in one of those moments. And it's a moment that's fueled by sort of the new technology, the ability to really say, oh, I'm going to read the news, but you're actually just supporting the bubble you happen to be in, whether it's a liberal bubble or a conservative bubble or whatever. So I think partly it's that, but mostly it's just this is the cycle we're in, and we will find our way out of this cycle. We just have to stay true and trust and be open, and not have to agree with people you don't agree with, but be open to the conversation. And that's...
Exactly. Right. I couldn't agree with you more. We're going to open it up for questions in just a second, but young people who are interested in journalism are often getting mixed messages. Either it's a dying industry or it's more important than ever and there are new jobs being created. I know you spoke at CUNY Journalism School last year, and would you give some of your thoughts about the future of journalism, why these journalism students should go into journalism, and what is your...
Okay, so this is a challenging time. Let's all agree on that. And the old job model of moving up in regional papers is not quite as easy as it once was. But the ability for journalists to have a voice, to have the ability to do their work, to get out there, and to get the information out digitally is more powerful than ever. So you can find your voice, even if you don't have the ability to move directly from Austin to New York and work for the New York Times. And we are, at the Times, we're doing what everyone is doing in the business. We are rethinking what are the skill sets we need. Some of you may have read, oh, the Times is cutting back on its newsroom. They're posting more, giving people, we don't do layoffs, we do buyouts. It's a union deal. So we put out a major buyout offer, and we'll take 50, 100 journalists will buy out. What are we really doing? Because our numbers are bigger than ever. We're rethinking what we need for the journalism of today. So we still need to have boots on the ground. We still need to have people who are prepared to cover Afghanistan and tough places like Syria. But we also need a much more digitally engaged journalistic skill sets. And that's video, it's audio, it's podcasts, it's design.
All aspects of social media.
What?
All aspects of social media.
Of media, yeah. So a lot of what we're doing is reorienting our newsroom for the skills necessary to succeed in the 21st century.
Why don't we open it up for questions? Anybody like to ask?
We need to come to the mic, sir.
And come to the mic and...
As we say in journalism, there are no bad questions, there are merely bad answers. So don't feel bad about asking a question, please.
So these journalism students don't have any questions for the chair of the New York Times and the former publisher? Come on.
Come on, guys.
Did Dean Bernhardt not teach you better?
All right.
Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Jacob Gonzales. I'm a second-year public relations student here at the University of Texas. Thank you for being here and for speaking to us. But my question is, how do you see the government's transition back, as you mentioned, cycles that we go through? So a new transition into the government making impressions on media as well as alterations. as affecting journalism here in the future.
When you say making alterations, the government making alterations, what exactly do you have in mind?
So there's been recent speculation about scientific studies once published through the White House government's website about, let's say, climate change.
Yes.
Now disappearing from the White House government
Okay.
website.
Well, now thank you. I do understand the question. I think a little bit. I mean, let's face it. We are dealing with the government, at the federal government at this moment, that is making major cuts in institutions that have supported what we need to do in this country for decades. Such as health and climate, right? I mean, by putting people in charge of the operation who believe that if you just get more oil, you've just solved the climate problem. So this is why we, as journalists, have to be there, have to aggressively say, look, this is what your government is doing. If you support that, you should know that they're doing it. If you don't support it, you should know that they're doing it. We're not telling you that they should do it or shouldn't do it, but here's what's happening to help you make thoughtful decisions about, is this the government? So I'm not sure I'm getting the question 100%, but I think those actions at the federal, it's happening at the federal level, and not just federal, in many states, similar things are taking place. Our job is to make sure voters know what is happening. And that's more critical than ever because, to your point, things are being slashed that for years were critical. Let's think about healthcare, right?
Yes, sir.
Does that help?
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We have any other questions over here? There we go.
Hello, thank you for giving us the opportunity to learn more about the New York Times. I'm sorry to deviate the conversation a little bit, but I'm interested in Latin America and the New York Times project in Español.
Español, yes.
Yes, and so I wanted to have a broad idea of what were you expecting from your coverage of Latin America and from the audience there also. And also, if you think that with Lydia Polgren leaving the New York Times for BuzzFeed, the orientation that you had originally is changing.
I think Lydia left for the Huffington Post.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yes, that's all right.
Yeah.
She was a big loss. We were very sorry to see Lydia leave us. So this is part of our international endeavor. And early on, we like everything, you're going to test ideas, you're going to learn from them. Some of them are going to fail. We had a number of tests on the pay model that didn't work out. We came under great criticism, but the learning allowed us to finally move to a model that is succeeding. The same is true with international. So we did the Chinese language website I mentioned to you earlier, but we also invested in Español and creating a Spanish language edition of the New York Times that you can get online. And as part of that, we added to our coverage of certain elements of Central and South America. And honestly, it's been a little bit of it's a lot of learning taking place. We still have it. It didn't hit the numbers we were hoping that it would hit. But from these various experiments, and now we have an Australian, sort of, obviously it's English language because it is Australia, but we do have an Australian element now that's unique to Australia of our coverage, and we've invested in having journalists there who help feed that, the same way we have journalists in Central and South America who help feed the Español. But it is all a part of our process of learning more so that we can become more and more international. I think, I'm going to get the number roughly right, I think 17% of our paid digital subscribers now are international. We have got to move that number significantly. And Español is one of those elements.
Thank you for that question. Arthur, you mentioned Huffington Post. We have BuzzFeed. We have Huffington Post. We have all these digital online news services. How does the New York Times get leads from them, or do some of these online services have a story that y'all don't get and that you have to follow up on? Or
Oh, sure. Or sometimes we even work with these organizations the same way we do work with The Guardian, major story in today's paper that we did with The Guardian. Same way we've done stories with other news organizations, or missed stories like, I don't know, let me think about something at random. Oh, Watergate. So, you know, if we trust the quality of the journalism and it appears on the Huffington Post or BuzzFeed, and we feel that's a story we need to bring to our readers, we will do the reporting, and you'll always see us say, this story initially came from BuzzFeed. We always give credit to the source.
where credit's due. Right. Please.
Hi, my name is Carla Romero, and I'm a first-year journalism major. After reading the 2020 report, I know y'all are trying to increase your demographics, so my question is, how are you trying to get more younger readers?
Oh, younger readers, yes indeed. By making our journalism more accessible. And by making it more accessible, I just don't mean, you know, giving you a college discount, although again, if you have not signed up, really, come on. But, you know, look, people are going to want a different experience. You know, you read your news on the phone, right? Exactly. I mean, not all of you, I do too, but I go back and forth between the iPad, the phone, and print. But it's got to have the right video experience. We have to have the right audio experience. How many of you have listened to The Daily?
Yeah.
All right. That's a good start. But we just have to be willing to invest in not just coverage of the story, but the presentation of the story in an engaging way. And people here probably don't remember when we created this digital experience called, I think it was called Snowfall, was it? Snowfall. It was truly a breakthrough moment for how John Branch, right? Wasn't he John Branch? That's right. He did an amazing look at people who were dying in these tragedies, but the presentation was digital only. It was just stunning, and it really changed the way we think about how to present the stories in a way that we hope will engage you.
Great question. Thank you very much. Let's go over here.
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Vanessa Szalinski, and I'm a third-year advertising major. And thank you so much for coming. These conversations and this dialogue helps change the perspective of all the students and how we see journalism and how we can maintain it forever. So thank you for being here. It really helps.
Okay, journalists, welcome to Ad Sales. First of all, thank you. Yeah. That was very sweet of you. You know, journalists always look at the dark side. Oh, yeah. Right? And Ad Sales, so thank you for being so positive. I love it.
No, oh my gosh, absolutely. I'm a huge nerd about journalists. I'm they're my superstars. So I appreciate it. So I have a question about the journalists in the New York Times. With as much as my stories as there are and the competition and all the different places you can put your stories, how do you maintain care for the journalists and that they're not having burnout or that they are having their perspectives changed? And that's, being said with you saying 1,400 different journalists that you'll have.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you. It is not a small question. I mean, in truth, I like to think we invest a lot in trying to care for our journalists, mostly in very difficult situations. I mean, war zone areas. But I think you're talking about something else, which is burnout. I mean, recognizing that, this person just desperately needs a break, that they've just, they've been, we have some stories where a journalist will invest 2 years in just one major heave. Now, that's not the norm, let's be clear. But it can be emotionally and psychologically exhausting. And it's a hard one, but you have to have the resources to support your journalists, and you have to be willing to invest in them, and that's the key thought: investing in them, and that means making sure that they can find the help they need. Cool. And we do have that problem.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Libby Cohen. I'm a first-year journalism student. I have 2 different questions. The first one is, how important is it to the New York Times to obtain diversity in not only the newsroom but in leadership positions?
Oh, well, it is critical. And I think we should, why don't you come up and answer that question for me there? It is something we have spent a lot of time, and we have not had the success that I'd hoped we would have had by now. As you know, Dean Baquet is our executive editor, so he's the first African-American executive editor at the New York Times. But in truth, it's an area where we are really we have been focused for many years. We've made some success, but not nearly the success I would have liked to have had by this point. I think we've done much better with women, honestly, than we have on the race side. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. But I think what we have to do is own our failures. And one of the things I had nothing to do with what I'm about to say, but if you have not gone and seen the obituaries that we are now writing about famous Black, Hispanic, Asian, or female people who died, and they should have had obits the minute that happened. And 100 years later, we're finally saying, "Oh, damn it, we're going to write that obit." I mean, this is owning our failure, and I'm so proud of the decision to do that. And by the way, if you haven't heard, it was the Friday Daily podcast. The interview we have with the woman who really is leading that effort is stunning.
It's an incredible thing you're doing.
But we have got to do it better. We have to own our failures, and we have to get better, and that we're making some real investments in that. Thank you.
Okay. And also, what should journalism students be doing right now if they want to end up in big platforms like the New York Times or the Post?
Let's talk. No, that's wrong. What should you be doing? I would like to say what you should be doing is learning, as you all are, about what it means to be a journalist in a digital-driven era. Yes, we still have to have people who are going to cover those stories and people who are going to be factual and really relentless. But the presentation, where once it was just me going out with a photographer, and well, guess what? Now you're your photographer. Or maybe going out and getting some words on tape kind of thing. You're doing that now. And being able to think about it and work with your colleagues to create an immersive experience on the story is all part of what it means to be a journalist in this century.
Do you have anything specific to say to UT students, UT journalism students?
I'm sorry?
Do you have anything specific for UT journalism students?
I think I do this at this point, right? Isn't that what I do?
Exactly right.
Hi. My name is Paul Iskra.
You're a tall guy?
I am a tall guy. I'm also a second-year journalism and American Studies student. I also have two questions for you. I'm just gonna kneel here. The first one, with regards to what you had mentioned about cycles of polarization in American history.
I'll tell you what, excuse me. You've got two people behind you, and we have a hard close at 2:45. So if you'll just keep it to one question, I'd appreciate it. Or take your two questions and do it into one.
That's a better idea. So, as I was saying, thank you. With regards to these cycles of polarization, do you ever publish with where the nation is at in mind?
Yes, very good question. We try to, and we've gotten a lot of heat recently because a number of our journalists are now going out there and they're interviewing and spending time and reporting stories with people who, quite frankly, their political opinions are not analogous to, say, mine, including one person who I think was reasonably close to being a racist. And we're trying to get better understanding of what is driving these people, what is the issues in their lives, what are their fears, what are their anxieties, and we've got to be more open to bringing that. To an earlier point, we don't have to agree with their thoughts, but let's agree the conversation has value. Even if you don't think that this person over here is the right person, isn't it better that you understand what's driving that person to act the way he or she is doing? And I think we've really made an investment in trying to do that kind of journalism.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. We'll go over here.
Uh,
Sorry.
Sure.
Okay, hi, my name is Bria Bolden. I'm a third-year journalism student, and I was just wondering if you think Facebook has become too powerful, and if so, how does journalism confront this issue?
Why are you picking on Facebook? Let's talk about Google. No, the truth is all of them are very, very powerful institutions. And I'm not, what I'm about to say is not to blame them. Please know that. But have they undercut the entire business model of the institutions that we're talking about, the news and organizations? Sure, because those are ad-driven models. And in a digital age, the advertising is going 90% to the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons of the world. But that's just the reality of the time we're in. And that's like cursing the invention of television. You know, that's a little, you know, oh, now they're only watching Walter Cronkite. Well, guess what? That's the nature of change, and we have to adapt to that world. So are they too very powerful? Clearly. Have they done some really things that are not so great? Yeah, I'll read today's New York Times. But do we, the news organizations that matter, have to find the business model in the new world that works for us? Yes.
Thank you. That's a really good question.
Hi, I'm Megan Bradford. I'm a second-year journalism major here. Thank you also again for coming. I had 2 questions, but I promise one of them is really brief. So
that's your call, not mine.
Okay, well, then I get this. The preferred question is, to what extent do you think the concept of news engagement is like stressed or regarded as a civic duty anymore among millennials?
Okay, let's go to the first question.
Okay, this first one's a briefer one, and that was, what was the percentage of the student subscriptions that the New York Times was receiving?
Of the 3.7 million that I talked about, I was not including any student subscriptions in that number.
Right.
None. So I don't actually know off the top of my head what the number of student subscriptions are. It's hundreds of thousands, but I don't actually know what that is. So, but I wasn't including it in the 3.7 million that I used earlier. Whew. Next.
Hi, my name is Eli Melendres, and I'm a first-year student. I was wondering, you mentioned the McCarthy era and the Vietnam War earlier. What have you learned from your father and your grandfather about handling the paper that has most helped you in your career?
Thank you. Boy, that's a great question. Historically, it is stand up to authority. If you feel that authority is pressing back on you in a way that's not right, you have to have the courage to move forward. And I can think of no better example than my dad. My grandfather had issues as well, but the biggest one was by far the Pentagon Papers. And we were talking about this over lunch, because I hope all of you have, or many of you have watched The Post, an excellent movie about how the Washington Post was so pissed off at the New York Times for having the Pentagon Papers. What that movie doesn't get to is when my father was making the decision as to whether or not to publish these very top secret documents about the war in Vietnam, he called in and he made the decision to do it. And he said, before I do it, I want to call in the lawyers. And he had the law firm that had represented the Times for 30, 40 years. And he brought them into his office and said, okay, we're going to be running with these series of stories. And the lawyer said, if you publish those stories, we will not represent you. When your lawyers say that, that takes what, you know you're up against something big. And my father said, fine, you're fired. And he brought in a new law firm. But I mean, that is, these are the people who you're hired to help you get to where you need to go.
Did it make you mad that the movie wasn't called The Times?
Yeah. Okay, you're playing to me. There's a sequel.
Y'all really
there's a sequel that I know is coming out soon. And it's going to be called The Times, and it's all about Watergate. But yeah, I was a little ticked off when they decided to make that movie, because that really was my father's greatest moment in support of journalism, to take on.
Y'all were the first.
We were the first. And Daniel Ellsberg gave those papers to us, knowing we would do this. And then, as you know, the Nixon administration tried to shut us down, and they did for a couple, and went to the Supreme Court, and we won that case, and the world is a better place for it. But I think you lead by example. And another great example was in World War II, when newsprint was being rationed. Newsprint is paper. Was being rationed. And there were 7 or 8 major New York City newspapers at that time. All but one had to cut back on their news. One didn't. The New York Times. It cut back on its advertising. And it said, no, this is the time we must invest in our journalism because people have to know what's going on. So we are going to cut back on the amount of advertising, AKA money, we get because we have to think about the long term. And that is a great lesson.
It's a gutsy decision, too.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
We have time for one more question.
All right. My name is Jade Fabello. I'm a second-year journalism student here. And my question for you was, earlier you mentioned how important it is to inform voters. And I wanted to know, how does the Times account for those and best serve non-voters or those who may be disillusioned with the whole process?
Well, first of all, the only way to help people who are disillusioned is to make them aware of how critical it is for them to make their decisions matter. I mean, cursing the darkness doesn't help the world. Lighting a candle does. And we have got to get to a place where we recognize, and we help people get to the place where they recognize the power of their voice, the power of their vote. And you know, if you think your government's going the wrong way, if you think the decisions being made by society are not right, then be out there. And I've got to say, one of the most powerful moments I think we're all experiencing right now is the high school students who have gotten out there in the wake of the horror in Florida of that shooting. I mean, they're on the streets again, and we can't forget how powerful that can be to change society. Voting and being present are critical, and we just have to try to make it, through our journalism, make it clear this is why this issue matters. We're not saying you should feel about it this one way or the other way, but it's a critical issue, and this is a time where you need to engage with the world around you to help make sure your voice and your vote are heard.
Arthur, I can't tell you what an honor it is to have you here at the University of Texas.
Well, thank you,
You've
sir.
been one of the most important people in media for a quarter of a century, and we really do appreciate everything you do every day. And AG, the paper's in good hands with AG.
Sure is.
And I can't tell you, the name of this symposium was The Best of the Times, The Worst of Times. I don't know where that came from, but with excuses to Charles Dickens, I'll take
give it
anyway,
to Charles Dickens.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for this.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you. And thank you. Thanks to all of you.
On behalf of all of our faculty, students, and staff, thank you so much. Another round of applause for our great speaker. And I want to thank all of you for coming. I hope you enjoyed our McGarr Symposium 2018. And have a great day. We also need to clear the room for our 3 o'clock class that starts in here. So if you'd like to take your conversations to the hallway, we'd appreciate it. Thank you all so much.